Welcome back to SierraCast TV, you guys. We're all about digging deep into the stuff you care about. Today, oh boy, this one's heavy. We're looking into some serious allegations against music industry giants. Sean Diddy Combs and Sean Jay-Z Carter. We've got legal documents, we've got news reports, even social media. It's a whole saga unfolding.
It really is. And the thing that's so captivating about this whole thing, I think, is that you've got celebrity, you've got power dynamics, you've got the legal system all colliding. It really forces us to ask, how do we deal with these types of accusations in such a high-stakes setting?
For sure. Let's start with the lawsuit itself. Just the basics. Who's making these claims and what are they saying happened?
Okay, so the person making these accusations is going by Jane Doe in the court filings. And what she's alleging is that she was assaulted by both Combs and Carter back in 2000 at an after-party for the MTV Video Music Awards. She says she was just 13 years old at the time.
13. Gosh, that's really young. The lawsuit also mentions there was another celeb there called Celebrity B, but they don't actually name them. Any thoughts on who that might be? And it also mentions something about a limo driver. This driver supposedly worked for Combs and was the one who brought Doe to the party.
It's really hard to say about Celebrity B. I mean, those are details that'll probably come out as the case moves forward. But I think the big takeaway here, what the lawsuit really focuses on, are the power dynamics. You've got this young girl excited about the VMAs, and the lawsuit claims an adult who was supposedly working for Combs took advantage of that.
It's just, wow. Okay, let's talk about the night of the alleged assault itself.
Mm-hmm.
What's Doe saying happened at that after party?
So according to the lawsuit, Doe says she had a drink and started feeling really disoriented, so she went to lie down in a bedroom. And that's when, according to her, Combs and Carter came into the room with Celebrity B. She's alleging that both of them raped her while Celebrity B was watching. Doe describes being physically overpowered and unable to give consent.
This is just awful. The lawsuit also says, and this is really disturbing, that this might not have been a one-time thing. There's a line that says Carter has been with Combs during many such instances described herein.
Right, and that's where things get, really complicated. The lawsuit tries to link this specific event to a bigger pattern of behavior by Combs. It even points to other lawsuits against him and a recent federal indictment, too.
Wait, a federal indictment? What are we talking about here legally?
Okay, so Combs was recently indicted on some serious charges like sex trafficking, racketeering, and creating a criminal enterprise. The indictment alleges he was abusing and coercing women, basically using them for sexual gratification. And on top of that, there are multiple civil lawsuits also pending against him. A lot of these lawsuits go back decades, and the accusations are similar: sexual assault, abuse, just a lot of really disturbing stuff.
So with all this going on, how have Combs and Carter actually responded to these accusations from Jane Doe?
Well, Combs' legal team has pretty consistently denied any wrongdoing in every case against him. Carter, though, he's been really vocal. He's completely denied the allegations. He's even accused Doe's lawyer of extortion. And he's filed a motion. He's trying to either get the lawsuit dismissed or force Doe to reveal her identity.
It just feels like there's so much to unpack here.
Yeah.
This whole situation just raises so many questions about power and abuse and how that plays out in an industry like music.
I completely agree. It makes you think about the culture around celebrity and how we deal with these accusations when it's such a high-profile person involved.
If you guys are interested in this kind of deeper dive into these issues, we cover tons of stories like this here on SierraCast TV. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a follow on Facebook too.
We're absolutely going to be following this case closely as things develop. What's standing out to you so far, just from what we've discussed?
Honestly, it's just the sheer number of allegations against Combs that's so striking. And then Carter trying to force Doe to reveal her identity. That just feels so aggressive, you know?
Yeah, I can see why you'd say that. It'll be interesting to see how the court handles that. How do they balance Doe's right to privacy with Carter's right to confront his accuser in court? There are just so many layers to this, legally and for everyone involved.
Okay, let's dive a little deeper into some of the specifics from the lawsuit itself. It says that Doe was given a drink that made her feel out of it. She describes it as tasting like orange juice, cranberry juice, and then something bitter.
That's right, and the lawsuit goes even further. They actually included a photograph. It's supposedly of the type of container that Combs or his people would use to add a drug called GHB to drinks. This GHB, it's often called a date rape drug because it can make people drowsy, confused, even mess with their memory. So that detail really adds another serious dimension to this whole thing.
And then the lawsuit itself gets really graphic, describing the alleged assault. Doe says Combs threw her against a wall. then threw her onto a bed, and then it all happened. She even says that she punched him in the neck when he was trying to force her to perform oral sex.
It's a really disturbing account, and I think the fact that she fought back against her attackers says a lot about what was going on.
It's also just heartbreaking to hear that no one at this party seemed to notice that she was in trouble. Like, no one stepped in to help. She says she ended up running out of the house and found a gas station where she could call her dad.
That just shows how isolated and helpless someone can feel in a situation like that. It's terrifying.
And then the lawsuit talks about the long-term impact of the alleged assault on her life. She claims she's been dealing with severe depression, PTSD, and she even developed a seizure disorder that she thinks is connected to all of this.
Yeah, and those long-term consequences really highlight how devastating something like this can be. It's not just physical. The emotional and mental impact can be just as bad, if not worse.
This is just so much to process. And we do need to keep in mind, these are just allegations right now. Both Combs and Carter deserve due process. But the fact that this lawsuit exists, it raises some really important questions about abuse, especially in the music industry, and how vulnerable people are treated.
Absolutely. This case is forcing us to look at those power dynamics and how they can be used to take advantage of people.
One of the things that stuck out to me is how detailed the lawsuit is about Combs' businesses, like his whole empire, Bad Boy Entertainment and all of that. It even suggests that some of his businesses were actually used to facilitate the alleged misconduct.
That's right. The lawsuit is claiming that Combs was using his companies, his money, his influence to create an environment where he could abuse women and get away with it. And that's a really disturbing thought. It makes you wonder if this is a systemic problem, not just one person's actions.
And the lawsuit doesn't hold back at all. They call Combs a menace to society. And they claim that he's been using his wealth to avoid consequences for years. It's pretty clear that Doe's legal team is going after him hard.
Yeah, they're not pulling any punches. The language they use is strong, and they paint a very specific picture of how he was allegedly behaving. It's like they're trying to show that this isn't just one isolated incident. This is a pattern.
They also go into a lot of detail about other accusations against Combs, stuff that goes back decades. There are allegations of physical assault, drugging, and sexual misconduct, and it involves both men and women.
Right, and it feels like they're doing that to establish a pattern. They're trying to show that this wasn't a one-time thing. This has been going on for a long time.
And of course, they bring up that federal indictment against Combs. The charges are really serious: sex trafficking, racketeering, and creating a criminal enterprise specifically to abuse women. That's not going away. And it's definitely going to have an impact on this new lawsuit, too.
For sure. That indictment adds a whole other layer of complexity to everything. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in the end.
One of the details they keep coming back to is how Combs allegedly used his businesses, Daddy's House Recording Studio, Bad Boy Entertainment, those kinds of places. They claim he would use his position in the music industry to coerce women into sexual acts.
Yeah, and that's a really key point. It suggests that what he's accused of doing wasn't just limited to, like, personal interactions. It was potentially tied to his professional life, too. That makes the whole thing even more complicated.
And the lawsuit also says that he would often drug his victims, things like GHB, ecstasy, Xanax, basically making them more vulnerable and unable to resist.
That's a disturbing element. If it's true, it suggests a level of planning and premeditation that's really scary.
And another thing that's just awful, they're saying that Combs' associates, even his employees, were involved in all of this too, like helping him get drugs, silencing victims, covering it all up.
Right, and that's a huge point. It's not just about Combs himself. It's about the possibility of a whole network of people who were complicit, who knew what was going on and helped him get away with it.
It's also really upsetting that the lawsuit says Combs specifically targeted young women, some of them even underage, and that he would lure them in with promises of fame and fortune.
Yeah, that's especially troubling. It suggests that he was preying on people who were especially vulnerable, people who might be more easily manipulated because they're young and ambitious.
The lawsuit also talks about times when Combs allegedly got physically violent, like punching, kicking, dragging people, even throwing things at them.
Those accusations are really upsetting. It goes beyond sexual assault. It's about physical harm and intimidation. It just creates this picture of someone who was out of control.
And they go back to the alleged assault on Doe, too, describing it in detail, saying that Combs threw her against a wall, threw her on a bed, and then raped her, and that Carter and Celebrity B were watching the whole time.
That level of detail is really hard to hear. It underscores the violence and the trauma that Doe is saying she experienced that night.
And then the lawsuit talks about how that alleged assault has impacted Doe's life ever since. Depression, PTSD, a seizure disorder. It's just a lot to deal with.
It really shows how long-lasting the effects of something like this can be. It doesn't just go away.
It's also disturbing that the lawsuit claims that Combs tried to hide what he was doing and keep his victims quiet.
Yeah, they're accusing him of using threats and intimidation to stop people from speaking out, even offering money to keep them quiet. It's all about maintaining control and avoiding responsibility.
The lawsuit specifically mentions non-disclosure agreements, saying that Combs used those to silence his victims and keep them from going public with their stories.
That's sadly not uncommon in situations like this. It's a way to use legal means to suppress accusations and protect someone's reputation.
And they're also claiming that Combs used his money and his influence to intimidate victims and their families, like making them afraid to speak out because they might face consequences.
That goes back to those power dynamics we were talking about. It's a reminder of how difficult it can be to hold someone accountable when they have that much power and influence.
The lawsuit specifically mentions an incident where Combs was caught on camera, kicking a woman, dragging her, throwing a vase at her. All this happened as she was trying to leave his hotel room. They also talk about his arrest back in 1999 for assaulting a record executive.
Right, and they're bringing up those examples to show that this isn't just a one-time thing. It's a pattern of behavior that's been going on for years.
And there's another incident in 2016. The lawsuit says that Combs tried to bribe hotel security to keep quiet about an alleged assault.
It seems like they're building a case that this has been a recurring issue.
The lawsuit also mentions several other lawsuits that have been filed against Combs over the years. These all involve allegations of sexual assault, abuse, drugging. And they name specific people, too, like Cassie Ventura and Joy Dickerson-Neal.
It seems like they're using those other lawsuits as evidence to support their case against Combs, trying to show that this isn't an isolated incident.
They actually go into detail about some of those accusations, too, talking about drugging, rape, physical assault, emotional abuse. It's not a pretty picture.
They're really trying to paint a comprehensive picture of Combs's alleged behavior.
And again, they emphasize the role that Combs' associates and employees allegedly played in all of this, saying that they helped him get drugs, silence victims, and cover up what he was doing.
They keep coming back to that idea of a network of complicity, that there were other people involved who knew what was going on and helped him get away with it.
And they keep mentioning those non-disclosure agreements, too, saying that Combs used those to silence his victims and keep them from talking publicly.
It's a common tactic, unfortunately.
And they reiterate that point about intimidation, too, saying that Combs used his wealth and influence to make victims and their families afraid to come forward.
It's a reminder of how power imbalances can play out in these situations.
They specifically mentioned the federal indictment against Combs, the one from September 2024, the one with the charges of sex trafficking, racketeering, and creating a criminal enterprise to abuse women. And they describe how the indictment says that Combs used violence, threats, coercion, and all sorts of abuse to get what he wanted.
That indictment is a big deal. It's a separate legal battle, but it's definitely going to have an impact on the civil lawsuit.
The lawsuit talks about how the indictment accuses Combs of luring women in with promises of romantic relationships, and then using threats and intimidation to force them into prostitution. They even mention these things called freak-offs.
That part of the indictment is especially disturbing. It suggests that there was a system in place to exploit and abuse women.
And the lawsuit highlights how the indictment claims that Combs and his people would drug women at these freak-offs and force them to have sex with male sex workers while being filmed.
Those are horrific allegations.
The lawsuit even mentions a detail from the indictment about how Combs and his alleged victims often needed 5-E fluids after these freak-offs, supposedly because they were so physically exhausted.
That detail is really hard to hear.
The lawsuit connects Combs' alleged actions to broader societal issues. They accuse him of having a profound contempt for women and a desire to dominate both minors and other men.
They're definitely trying to make a statement about more than just this one case. They're talking about a pattern of abuse and a disregard for other people.
Now, the lawsuit also spends a good amount of time talking about the relationship between Combs and Carter. It mentions how long they've been friends, their musical collaborations. It even mentions an interview from 2023 where Combs said that Carter is one of the few people who can call him Sean.
It feels like they're establishing that connection to show that these two guys were close, that they weren't just casual acquaintances.
And the lawsuit emphasizes the fact that both of them were at the 2000 MTV Video Music Awards. and that they were both at the after-party where the alleged assault on Doe took place.
They're establishing a timeline and putting both men at the scene.
And then the lawsuit accuses Carter directly, saying that he held Doe down while Combs raped her, and then that he raped her himself while Combs watched.
That's a serious accusation. It's not just about being present, it's about actively participating.
The lawsuit also accuses Carter of being there during other times when Combs allegedly assaulted women, like it was a pattern, and Carter was complicit.
That's a big claim, and it could have serious consequences for Carter.
And it's also really disturbing that the lawsuit says that Carter tried to intimidate and harass Doe's lawyers and their families, like he was trying to scare them into dropping the case.
That's a separate issue that could potentially lead to legal trouble for Carter.
So Carter has publicly responded to these allegations. He released a statement. He called the whole thing a blackmail attempt and accused Doe's lawyer, Tony Busby, of being a fraud.
He came out swinging. He's basically saying that Doe and her lawyer are making this up to get money from him.
His statement really focuses on Busby, the lawyer. Carter says that Busby has a history of filing lawsuits like this against famous people, and that he's just trying to smear Carter's name.
It's a classic strategy. Try to discredit the lawyer and make it seem like the whole case is bogus.
Carter's statement also talks about his family, his wife, Beyonce, and their kids. He talks about how hard it's been to explain all of this to his children, and how it could hurt them.
He's trying to appeal to people's emotions, trying to get them to see him as a victim, too.
Carter's statement also basically says that he has nothing to do with any of this, that it's all lies made up by a sleazy lawyer.
He's trying to distance himself from the accusations as much as possible.
And he ends his statement on a defiant note, saying that he won't pay Doe any money and that he's confident he'll be cleared of all charges.
He's projecting an image of strength and innocence. He wants people to believe that he's being wrongly accused.
And Doe's lawyer, Tony Busby, has responded to Carter's statement. He posted something on social media.
It seems like this is turning into a public battle. Each side is trying to control the story and make the other side look bad.
Busby's post calls out Carter for saying that he wasn't involved in the lawsuit at first, and then later filing his own lawsuit against Busby under a fake name.
That's an interesting point. It suggests that Carter might have been trying to hide his involvement in the case.
Busby also defends Doe. He says that she never asked Carter for any money, and he accuses Carter of bullying and harassing Doe and her legal team.
He's directly contradicting Carter's claims about blackmail.
And Busby ends his post by saying that they're going to litigate the facts in court, not in the media.
He's trying to shift the focus back to the legal process.
So we've got Combs facing really serious charges, Carter denying everything, and a lawyer who's become a big part of this whole story. It's just a tangled mess of accusations and denials and legal maneuvering, and it's only going to get more complicated from here.
You're telling me this is a high-profile case that's attracting a lot of media attention. It's going to be interesting to see what happens next.
So we've talked about the accusations against Diddy and Jay-Z, but I kind of want to shift gears a bit. Like, what does all this mean legally? I feel like this lawsuit is a total lesson in how the law works with cases like this, especially when you're dealing with celebrities and things that supposedly happened so long ago.
It's definitely a case study, yeah. One of the things the lawsuit specifically mentions is this New York City law, the Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act. It's a mouthful, but basically it's called the VGMVPA, and it can be a really powerful tool for victims.
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so break it down for me. What's the VGMVPA, and how does it even apply to this case?
So basically, the VGMVPA gives victims of gender-motivated violence a chance to sue in civil court, even if it's been a really long time, like way past the normal deadline for pressing charges. The key thing is they have to prove that the violence happened because of the victim's gender.
Okay, so how does that connect to what Jane Doe is saying happened to her?
Doe's lawyers are arguing that the assault, by its very nature, was motivated by her gender. Because she was underage, she couldn't legally consent to anything. And they're saying that the assault itself shows this power imbalance that's rooted in gender.
So they're building their case around that power dynamic?
Yeah.
Makes sense. And they're also going after Combs' businesses, right?
Yeah.
Saying they share some of the blame.
Exactly. The lawsuit claims that Combs companies like Bad Boy Entertainment and Daddy's House Recordings actually helped make the assault possible. They're saying that Combs used his companies to create an environment where this kind of thing could happen, and that the companies should have known what he was allegedly doing and stopped it.
So it's like They're saying the companies were complicit. That's a pretty bold move.
It is, yeah. They're basically alleging that the companies either knew or should have known about Combs' behavior, and they didn't do anything to stop it. This strategy of going after institutions, not just the individual, is becoming more common in these types of cases.
Makes sense. So the lawsuit was filed in New York. Is there a reason they chose New York specifically?
Probably a couple of reasons, actually. First, the alleged assault happened in New York City. So that automatically gives the courts there the power to hear the case. It's called jurisdiction. And then second, New York has a reputation for being pretty plaintiff-friendly in these types of cases, especially sexual assault cases.
What do you mean by plaintiff friend? Like, it's easier to win there.
Well, it's not about winning exactly, but New York has laws like the VGM VPA, that one we just talked about. And juries in New York tend to be more sympathetic to victims of sexual assault. So strategically, it makes sense to file the case there.
So it's not just about where it happened. It's about finding a place where the legal system might work better for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Lawyers think about all that stuff, where to file, what laws apply, even what the jury might be like. It's all part of the strategy.
That's so interesting. So what about the other side? What are Combs and Carter's lawyers going to argue?
Well, so far, Combs' lawyers have always denied any wrongdoing in every case against him. Their strategy is probably going to be to say that Doe is lying, maybe that she's doing this for money or fame. They'll try to poke holes in her story, question her memory, anything they can do to make the jury doubt her.
So basically just try to tear her story apart.
Yeah, it's a pretty standard defense tactic in these types of cases. Now, with Carter, it's a little different. He's straight up denied everything and said this is all a shakedown by Doe's lawyer. His team might say he wasn't involved at all, that he's being targeted just because he's famous.
Oh, and he wants Doe to reveal her identity too, right?
Yeah.
What's the big deal about that?
Well, a lot of times in sexual assault cases, victims are allowed to use a fake name like Jane Doe to keep their privacy. It's to protect them from harassment and stuff like that. But the people being accused, they often say it's not fair, that they should be able to know who's accusing them.
So it's like whose rights are more important? The victim's right to privacy or the accused person's right to know who they're up against?
Exactly. The courts have to figure that out. Balance those competing interests. Carter's lawyers are probably going to say that making Doe reveal her name would make things fairer, that it would let them investigate her claims better.
It's like a chess match, huh? All these legal moves.
Yeah,
And it all has real consequences for people's lives.
definitely. We can't forget that. Behind all the legal stuff, there are real people who are being affected by all of this.
Yeah, it's easy to lose sight of that sometimes, all the strategy and the arguments. It's good to remember the human side of things.
For sure. And we also have to remember that the legal system, even though it's supposed to be about justice, isn't always perfect. It's complicated, and we can't predict how it's going to turn out. In this case, or any case, really.
So many things we just don't know yet. What are some of the key things to watch for as this moves forward? Like, what could really change things?
Well, keep an eye on the discovery process. That's where both sides are gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, figuring out what their case is really going to be. What they find during that process could totally change the direction of the whole thing.
What kind of evidence are we talking about? Like, what are they looking for?
It could be anything, really. Emails, text messages, bank records, people who saw stuff and are willing to talk about it, even physical evidence if there's any. The goal is to find anything that either helps or hurts their case.
So it's like a big investigation.
Kind of, yeah. It can take a long time, but it's where the most important stuff usually comes out.
What else should people be watching for?
Well, what the judge decides, he's going to be ruling on a bunch of stuff. Motions from both sides, like Carter trying to dismiss the case or make Doe reveal her name. Whatever the judge decides can have a huge impact on how things go from there.
Right. And then there's that whole federal indictment against Combs, too. That's got to be a big factor.
Oh, absolutely. Whatever happens with that case could affect this lawsuit, too. If Combs ends up getting convicted on those charges, it's going to make it a lot harder for him to defend himself against Doe's allegations.
It's a lot to keep track of. Like, this whole thing feels like a legal thriller, you know? Famous people, secrets, shocking stuff coming out.
Yeah, kind of, right? And it's not just happening in the courtroom, it's playing out in the media, too. Public opinion and all that.
It can be hard to keep up with it all. If you guys are watching this and you want to know what's going on, make sure you subscribe to SierraCast TV on YouTube and follow us on Facebook, too. We break down all this complicated stuff and try to make it easier to understand.
Exactly. We're going to keep following the story and keep you updated on what's happening. What's really stood out to you about the legal side of this?
Honestly, the fact that Doe can even sue after so much time has passed blows my mind. That VGMVPA law seems pretty amazing.
It is, right? It basically recognizes that trauma from this kind of violence can stick with you for a long time, and that it might take people a while to feel ready to seek justice.
That makes sense. And I'm really curious to see what comes out during that discovery process they were talking about. It feels like there could be some bombshells, you know?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's where we usually see things get really interesting.
Okay, so we've looked at the accusations themselves. We've talked about the legal stuff. But now I kind of want to zoom out a little. Look at the bigger picture. Like, what does this whole case tell us about, I don't know, society, about celebrity, about how power works, especially in situations like this?
You're hitting on something really important there. This isn't just about one lawsuit, right? It's about the music industry as a whole. It's about this culture of keeping things quiet. And it's about how we, like, as a society, deal with these kinds of accusations, especially when it involves people who are rich and famous and powerful.
It feels like this case is bringing some stuff to light that maybe people don't want to talk about.
I think so, yeah. I mean, how often do we see this? Someone accuses a celebrity of something, and everyone's like, oh, they must be lying, or they're just doing it for the money. Like, there's this automatic distrust of anyone who comes forward, especially if they're accusing someone with a lot of money and fame.
It's like the benefit of the doubt always goes to the powerful person.
Exactly. And that can be really harmful because it makes people afraid to speak up. And it allows these abusers to keep doing what they're doing because they know they can probably get away with it. It creates this whole culture of silence.
And then you've got the music industry specifically. You have these young artists, right? A lot of them are just starting out. They're ambitious, maybe a little naive, and they're dealing with these powerful executives who can make or break their careers.
It's a recipe for disaster, honestly. When you have that much power over someone, over their dreams, over their livelihood, it can be so easy to take advantage of them. And it makes it even harder for them to speak out. Because what if they lose everything?
One of the things that the lawsuit really focused on was the role of enablers. All those people who were around Combs, his associates, his employees. The lawsuit claims that they helped him cover up what he was doing, keep victims quiet, like they were all part of it.
Right, that whole Combs business thing they kept talking about? That was chilling. It's like, was there this whole network of people who were complicit, who knew what was going on and helped him get away with it for years?
It's a scary thought. How many people knew and how many people looked the other way?
That's a question we need to be asking. We have to look at the people who surround these abusers, the people who might be helping them, because it's not just about the individual, it's about the system that protects them.
It feels like there's this bigger conversation happening right now about accountability, about how, for years, people in positions of power have been able to get away with doing terrible things, and they get away with it because they have money, they have influence.
Totally. But it feels like things are starting to change. People are speaking out more. There are more lawsuits, more attention from the media. It feels like we're finally starting to realize that no one is above the law, no matter how rich or famous they are.
It's like a shift in the culture. People are demanding more transparency. They want to see people held accountable.
And social media is playing a big part in that too, right? It gives people a voice, a way to share their stories, connect with each other. It's making it a lot harder for these powerful people to control the narrative and keep everything quiet.
One of the biggest takeaways from all of this, I think, is that we have to believe victims. For too long, we've been dismissing people who come forward with accusations like this, especially if they're accusing someone famous or powerful.
We have to create a space where people feel safe to speak out, where they know they'll be taken seriously, and we have to challenge the norms that protect abusers and silence victims.
I was really struck by Jane Doe's decision to come forward. I mean, after all these years, that takes a lot of guts.
It really does. To go up against people like Diddy and Jay-Z, that's incredibly brave. It shows how strong she is, and it could inspire other people to come forward too.
Maybe this whole thing will actually lead to some real change.
I hope so. That's the
Oh.
goal, right? That cases like this will push us in the right direction, toward a world where abuse isn't tolerated and where victims are supported.
This whole deep dive has been really intense. It's about abuse, it's about power, it's about fighting for justice, but it's also about something bigger. It's about changing the way we think about these things, holding people accountable, creating a world where victims feel safe and supported.
That's a great way to put it. This one case is like a microcosm of all these bigger issues that we have to keep talking about and keep fighting for. It's a reminder to challenge systems of power, support victims, and try to make things better for everyone.
And if you're watching this and you experience sexual assault, please know that you're not alone. There are people who can help. The National Sexual Assault Hotline is a great resource. We'll put their number in the description below.
There is help out there. And speaking out, even if it's been a long time, can be a really important step in the healing process.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, you guys. This is a story that's still unfolding, so we'll keep you updated as things develop. And if you want more analysis and coverage of stories like this, make sure you subscribe to SierraCast TV on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. We're your awesome source for news and entertainment, and we're always digging deep into the stuff that matters.